It's their first taste of freedom. Researchers are releasing several Przewalski horses into the wild.
China's Yungar Basin is known as the land where nothing grows. By 1986, this vast desert looked almost dead. The soil had turned hard, dust storms swept across the region, and plants struggled to survive. Then China approved a plan that sounded completely insane. To stop the desert from spreading, they shipped wild Przewalski's horses from East German and American zoos and released them into one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. Many experts called it a waste of money. Others said the horses would die within months. But just 5 years later, something happened that nobody expected. The desert began changing, and the proof was visible from space. So, how could a few wild horses transform a dying landscape? And how did China come up with such a bold plan in the first place? Let's dive in. The dying wilderness. The Yungar Basin, a vast desert region in northwestern China, did not always look like a place without hope. For nearly 10,000 years, wild horses roamed these lands. They grazed, traveled across huge distances, and quietly helped keep the ecosystem in balance. Then, in 1969, they disappeared. Decades of hunting, habitat loss, and competition with livestock pushed them to extinction in the wild. The last confirmed sighting came from a Soviet geological survey team. After that, the horses were gone. At first, the loss seemed insignificant. Most people barely noticed, but the land did. Something beneath the surface had already started to change. The soil slowly became harder and less fertile. Rain still fell across the region, bringing roughly 4 to 6 inches of water each year. But the ground absorbed less and less of it. Instead of sinking into the soil, much of the water ran off or evaporated. Seeds struggled to sprout, plants struggled to spread, and a slow ecological collapse began unfolding across the landscape. By 1974, scientists discovered something alarming. Nitrogen levels had fallen so low that some researchers compared parts of the soil to lunar dust. The ground was still there, but much of the life inside it was disappearing. Then came another warning. Satellite images taken in 1982 revealed that the Gobi Desert was expanding by nearly 70 kilometers every decade. Grasslands shrank, farmland disappeared, entire stretches of land slowly changed color as vegetation retreated year after year. The crisis was no longer confined to the Yungar Basin. As the soil weakened, powerful dust storms began carrying it far beyond the desert itself. In March 1983, one massive storm transported an estimated 43,000 tons of topsoil all the way to Beijing, more than 1,000 miles away. Dust blanketed the city for days. Hospitals reported a 300% increase in respiratory emergencies. What happened in the desert was now affecting millions of people. Chinese leaders were already searching for solutions. In 1978, they launched the Green Great Wall Project, an ambitious plan to create a 4,500-kilometer forest barrier against the advancing desert. The idea sounded promising, but many of the trees required more water than the region could provide. Groundwater levels dropped, wells began drying up, and many of the trees failed to survive. The desert kept advancing. By 1985, agricultural productivity across Xinjiang province had fallen by 34%. Then computer models delivered an even more disturbing warning. If the trend continued, parts of Beijing could become borderline uninhabitable by 2050. The desert seemed unstoppable. Every solution appeared weaker than the problem itself. As the crisis deepened, Chinese ecologists began searching for a completely different answer. And eventually, a small team led by Yang Jianming proposed an idea so unusual that many people dismissed it immediately, because they believed the solution to a spreading desert was not more machines, not more chemicals, and not even more trees. It was an animal that had vanished years earlier. Forgotten wild engineers. The idea that Yang Jianming proposed did not involve machines, roads, or massive construction projects. It focused on an animal that had lived across these lands for thousands of years, the Przewalski's horse. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary horse, but scientists soon realized it was something very different. This was not a breed created by humans. It was the last truly wild horse species on Earth. One clue lay in its DNA. Domestic horses have 64 chromosomes. Przewalski's horses have 66. That difference showed they followed a separate path through history, while most other horses were shaped by human breeding. Researchers found other signs as well. While humans bred horses for speed, strength, or work, Przewalski's horses remained largely unchanged. Their stocky bodies, upright manes, and striped legs resembled horses that appeared in ancient cave paintings thousands of years ago. Yet, despite surviving for so long, they nearly disappeared within a single century. By 1985, only about 900 remained alive. Every one of them lived in captivity. The entire population descended from just 12 to 14 animals captured between 1899 and 1903. After World War II, the situation became even more serious. The global population fell to only 31 horses, with just 9 capable of breeding. At one point, the species survived in only 2 zoos in Munich and Prague. A single disease outbreak could have pushed them into extinction. Most people saw a species struggling to survive. Chinese ecologists saw something else. They believed the horses were a missing part of the Jungar Basin ecosystem. Historical records showed that wild horses had lived there for thousands of years. After they disappeared, many of the region's environmental problems began to worsen. This led researchers to consider a different possibility. What if the horses had done more than simply graze? What if their daily movements helped shape the landscape itself? Scientists began viewing them as ecosystem engineers. Their grazing, trampling, and movement could influence soil, water, plants, and other wildlife. If that was true, bringing them back might help restore natural processes that had been missing for years. The idea sounded unusual. Many experts doubted that a horse could influence an entire ecosystem. But the evidence kept pointing in the same direction. The horses disappeared, and the land began to decline. China decided to put the theory to the test. There was just one problem. These horses had spent generations behind fences, and the wilderness was about to challenge them in ways nobody expected. Against every odds, China officially launched the plan in 1986. On a cold December morning, 11 Przewalski's horses arrived in the Jungar Basin after a long journey from East German and American zoos. The move was about more than transporting animals. It was an attempt to return a species to a landscape where it had once played an important role. The horses entered the Jimzar Breeding Center, where researchers hoped they would gradually adjust to life in the wild. But there was a major challenge. These animals had spent 3 to 4 generations in captivity. They had grown up with regular feeding, veterinary care, and protected enclosures. The wilderness demanded a very different set of skills. Researchers described the problem as a loss of survival culture. The horses still had natural instincts, but many learned behaviors had disappeared over time. They had never needed to search for water across a dry landscape. They had never encountered predators. They had little experience dealing with extreme weather. The first months quickly revealed how difficult the transition would be. Within weeks, botfly infestations spread through the herd. The parasites caused painful stomach injuries and made feeding more difficult. Some animals weakened as they fought the infections. For critics of the project, these problems seemed to confirm their doubts. Many believed the experiment would fail. Then winter arrived. The Ungar Basin experienced temperatures as low as -42 degrees Fahrenheit. Strong winds swept across the open landscape and snow covered much of the available vegetation. The conditions tested both the animals and the researchers. Several horses suffered frostbite. 2 mares lost their unborn foals. The losses were disappointing, but they also revealed something unexpected. As the horses faced new challenges, behaviors that had not been seen for generations began to reappear. Researchers observed stallions breaking frozen surfaces with their hooves to reach water underneath. This behavior had never been recorded in captivity. Mares gathered around young foals during severe weather and sheltered them from the wind. The herd also learned to clear snow with their front legs to reach buried vegetation. None of these behaviors were taught by humans. They emerged naturally as the animals adapted to their environment. Over time, the horses became more capable and more confident. When spring arrived in 1987, researchers noticed clear changes in the herd. The animals explored larger areas, responded more effectively to challenges, and relied less on the support of the breeding center. They no longer behaved like zoo animals living in a controlled environment. They were beginning to function as wild horses again. For the scientists involved in the project, this was an encouraging sign. The horses were not only surviving, they were recovering behaviors that seemed lost after generations in captivity. At the same time, another process was quietly unfolding. Most attention remained focused on the horses and their struggle to adapt. Yet researchers soon began noticing small changes in the landscape itself. At first, the signs seemed insignificant, but beneath the horses' hooves, a transformation had already begun. Beneath their hooves. When spring arrived in 1987, scientists expected to see whether the horses could stay alive. Instead, they started noticing changes in the land itself. A patch of soil held moisture a little longer. A few plants looked healthier than before. Nothing seemed dramatic. Yet the researchers continued measuring, recording, and comparing every detail. Slowly, a hidden pattern began to appear. The real story was unfolding where nobody could see it. One of the first discoveries came from the ground beneath the herd. Przewalski's horses weighed between 600 and 800 pounds. Every step pressed enormous force into the surface. Years earlier, the Ungar Basin had developed a hard crust that blocked water from moving downward. Rain often landed on the surface and quickly disappeared. But the horses were changing that process one hoof print at a time. Their movement cracked the hardened layer and opened thousands of tiny pathways. The effect seemed simple, yet it changed everything around it. New measurements soon revealed something remarkable. During the first year, moisture retention increased by 23%. Rainwater no longer rushed away as quickly as before. The herd had created nearly 10,000 small depressions across every hectare they traveled. Each one acted like a tiny reservoir. Water collected inside these shallow pockets and stayed available for much longer periods. What looked like ordinary footprints were quietly helping the land hold life again. Another clue appeared as researchers tracked the animals across larger distances. GPS monitoring later showed that Przewalski's horses traveled about 15 kilometers each day. Their routes looked random from above, but scientists discovered a hidden order inside those movements. The animals spent time feeding heavily in one area, then moved far away, then returned later. This behavior prevented any single location from becoming exhausted. Some patches remained short, others grew taller. Open spaces appeared between them. Ecologists called this pattern a disturbance mosaic. Different plants and animals preferred different conditions, and the horses were creating all of them at the same time. The mystery continued growing. Researchers then turned their attention to something many people ignored completely. Horse manure covered parts of the landscape wherever the herd traveled. Most people saw waste. Scientists saw a delivery system. Detailed analysis revealed seeds from more than 20 plant species hidden inside the dung. The journey through the horses' digestive systems actually improved germination rates by as much as 300%. Digestive acids weakened tough seed coatings and helped young plants emerge more easily. 1 gram of manure contained up to 7.4 viable seedlings. Because the animals traveled long distances every day, they carried future vegetation across huge areas of the Ungar Basin. The discoveries did not stop there. The manure also returned valuable bacteria and nutrients to the earth. Nitrogen levels began rising again. Microbial activity increased. Underground life slowly returned to places that had remained inactive for years. Each improvement supported another. Water helped plants. Plants supported insects. Nutrients strengthened the soil. Every small process connected to the next like pieces of a giant puzzle. At first, the changes were too small for anyone to notice, but within a few years, the desert itself began sending unmistakable signals. Life returns again. The first visible signs appeared quietly. No headlines announced them. No one standing far away would have noticed anything unusual. Yet across parts of the Ungar Basin, small patches of green started appearing where bare ground had dominated for years. Scientists continued their surveys and soon realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Plants that had not been seen since the horses disappeared began growing again. Some seeds had remained hidden beneath the surface for nearly 2 decades. They had waited through years of heat, wind, and drought. Now the conditions finally allowed them to wake up. By the 3rd year, botanists documented the return of 22 plant species that many people believed were gone forever. The landscape no longer looked frozen in decline. It looked alive again. Each season brought another surprise. Areas visited by the horses showed stronger growth than nearby locations. Grass biomass increased by 43% in grazed areas compared with ungrazed controls. New shoots spread across places that had looked empty for years. What had started as scattered green patches slowly connected into larger stretches of vegetation. The change did not happen overnight. It happened step by step. But every step pushed the recovery forward. A much bigger transformation soon followed. The returning vegetation attracted new forms of life. One of the first arrivals came from the insect world. Dung beetles, absent from the region for 15 years, suddenly appeared in huge numbers. They buried organic material beneath the surface and helped enrich the recovering earth. Researchers soon recorded 43 insect species that had not been documented in decades. The growing insect population created fresh opportunities for many other creatures. Nature was rebuilding connections that had been broken for years. The next visitors arrived from the sky. Birds began returning to places they had avoided for a long time. Larks appeared across open areas. Wheat ears moved through the recovering habitat. Sand grouse followed the expanding food supply. Their calls added new sounds to landscapes that had once felt silent and empty. The air itself seemed different. Every returning species strengthened the recovery and helped support another part of the ecosystem. The chain reaction kept expanding. Activity on the ground increased as well. Gerbils started appearing among the vegetation. Pikas established themselves in suitable locations. Ground squirrels returned to areas where food and shelter became available again. These small animals created new food sources for predators and helped spread nutrients through their daily activities. Each species filled a role that had remained empty for years. Together they formed a growing network of life. Scientists watched as one improvement supported the next. More vegetation supported more insects. More insects attracted more birds. More birds helped distribute seeds. More small mammals added movement and diversity. Every connection strengthened another connection. The ecosystem no longer depended on one change alone. It now supported itself through countless natural relationships working together every day. What once looked like a dying region had become a living system again. Hope returned to places where very few people expected it. Yet the most astonishing proof of all still remained hidden from human eyes. But the biggest surprise did not appear on the ground. It appeared high above, in satellite images. Maps begin changing. Then scientists looked at satellite images and saw something incredible. For years, they had walked across the Yungar Basin collecting samples, counting species and recording small changes. Now they could finally see the bigger picture. The images revealed green patches spreading across the landscape from the horses' core territories. What appeared small on the ground looked much larger from above. The recovery was no longer limited to a few locations. It was spreading across an entire region. The transformation looked like a slow wave moving through the desert. Every new image revealed another surprise. Areas that once appeared dry and empty now showed growing signs of vegetation. The changes became easier to track with each passing year. Scientists compared older images with newer ones and found a clear difference. The land no longer looked trapped in decline. It was moving in the opposite direction. The results became too large to ignore. Another discovery soon strengthened the evidence. For decades, water had been disappearing from the region. Since 1970, the water table had dropped by about 3 centimeters every year. Researchers expected that trend to continue. Instead, something unexpected happened. In 2003, the decline stopped. The water table stabilized. Then it began rising. This was one of the strongest signs that the ecosystem was rebuilding itself. More water remained in the soil. More vegetation covered the surface. More life helped protect the land from losing moisture. A cycle that once pushed the desert forward had started working in reverse. The numbers continued getting better. By 2023, the original group of 11 horses had grown to 534 animals. The soil that once struggled to support life now supported more than 20 plant species that had not grown there for decades. The expanding desert itself began retreating at a rate of 47 hectares every year. What many people called impossible in 1986 was now happening in plain sight. The proof appeared in photographs, surveys, field reports, and satellite data. Every source pointed to the same conclusion. The horses had changed far more than their own future. The impact stretched far beyond the herd. Scientists also began comparing this success with other efforts across China. For years, projects relied mainly on planting trees to stop desert expansion. Some helped. Others created new problems by using large amounts of water. Yet these horses worked differently. They supported natural processes that already belonged to the landscape. Instead of forcing change from the outside, they helped restore relationships that had existed for thousands of years. The lesson felt both simple and surprising. Sometimes nature already holds the answer. Humans only need to help it return. The story that began with 11 horses stepping off a cargo plane had become something much larger. It became proof that a damaged ecosystem can recover when its missing pieces return. So, what happened in the Yungar Basin reminds us that nature often knows how to heal itself. In 1986, 11 horses arrived in a dying landscape. Years later, they helped bring life back to a place many people had already given up on. Their story shows how one missing piece can change everything. Do you think projects like this could help other deserts around the world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more amazing journeys into nature's hidden wonders. Until next time, thanks for watching.